I can only see the world as it should be, and when it is not, the imperfection stands out like a nose in the middle of a face. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 53 of Movies Are Awesome, the show all about shut-ins. My name is Nathan Pottle, and thank you for joining me today. Corona is in full swing, so we're still staying at home, still just social distancing. I hope everyone is doing well. I hope that you guys are finding things to do, things like listen to this podcast. And I was sitting and thinking, and I was wondering, like, everyone is at home. So this is a wonderful opportunity not only to promote the podcast and get people engaged and talking, but it's also a wonderful time for people to catch up on movies that maybe they haven't seen or feel like, oh, this is like, yeah, I'll watch that eventually. This is a wonderful time to catch up on all of that stuff. And so for myself, I was sitting and thinking like, well, how can I help people with doing something like that if that's something that they're interested in? And I wanted to make a list of must-watch movies that if you consider yourself a movie buff, you should see these movies. Or if you consider yourself like just a big movie fan in general, like these are movies that are important to the film industry and to film history. Movies that you should see at least once, you know? Like something that when these movies come up or people talk about them, you can be in the know and you'll be like, oh yes, I know that movie because I've seen it. So I set out onto this journey to make this ultimate movie list. And I was like, well, how many movies should it be? I started out and the list kept getting longer and longer and longer. And I ended up having to say to myself, okay, well, like I need to have a cap here somewhere. So the list of movies that I came up with, it is 100 movies long. And you don't have to worry, I'm not just going to rattle off 100 movies in today's episode. I have then taken that list of 100 movies and split it into 4. So across the next few weeks, we're going to do 4 episodes of this ultimate movie buff watch list, and I'm very excited to share this list with you guys. I've had some friends message me and recommend some movies. Me and my wife worked on this list as well. So there's a whole lot of different opinions coming in here of what is an essential watch for movies. And I did try to be as impartial as possible when creating this list. Like there are some movies on this list that I actually don't even really like that much, but I feel that they're important to the film industry and film history as a whole, that they deserve a spot on this list, even though I don't enjoy the movie. For the most part, I really like all of these movies. I have seen every single one. If you want to follow along and mark off how many of these 100 you have seen, go ahead and do so. I've divided these 4 episodes in release order. So this first episode is going to be the oldest movies, and we're going to get newer and newer and newer as we go through the list. I should probably mention that one criteria that I set for myself when making this list is I didn't want any of the movies to be too new, because even though a movie can seem really great when it first comes out, maybe after a couple of years, maybe I cool off on it a little bit, and it's not as good as I think it is. So I think by the time we get to episode 4, the newest movie on this list is from 2017. So nothing after 2017 is on the list, and I think that's fine. That's not a problem. Even though some great movies have come out in the last few years, I think that those movies just aren't quite old enough yet in order to have like a must-watch, all-time type status. So 2017 is as far as I go, and why don't I get started? Because I've got a lot of movies to talk about here, 25 movies today, and then we'll do number 26 to 50 next week, and then 51 to 75, and then 76 to 100 in the next following episode. So let's get started here with number 1, and number 1 is a movie called Metropolis. Now, Metropolis came out in 1927, and I do believe it is a German film. I didn't write down any kind of notes about any of these movies. I just have to go off of what I know off the top of my head here. So I'm pretty sure it's a German film, but it's also a silent movie. And also, for coming out in 1927, this movie's quite long. It's 2.5 hours, which is crazy. And this movie is about like a dystopian future, which is kind of crazy because more like when you go farther back into the past, they have more hopeful visions of the future, especially in like the 60s and 70s. Like visions of the future were just like spectacular and amazing. And then when you got to the 80s was this resurgence of dystopian futures, and everything in the future is awful and horrible. And I have some movies like that on this list, but Metropolis is the earliest one, 1927. And this movie, it is in black and white, so brace yourself for that. It is a silent film, so brace yourself for that. But I feel this movie is really important in a couple different aspects. For one, it's very prophetic in the way class structure and social standings look. It's all about like the working class versus the elite class. It's very, very accurate to kind of how our world looks today. And also at the same time, just like visually, how this movie looks is crazy. So it's about like a future city where there's lots of really hard workers, and there are a few who get by on life with not doing anything, just being rich and having a good time. And there's like robots and things walking around too. And the robot, if you look at the poster for Metropolis, if you just look up this movie, if you look up the poster for Metropolis, that robot looks almost exactly like C-3PO in Star Wars. So this is a movie that was very influential on how other movies look and how other movies are designed. And it's also been a while since I've seen it, so I can't comment any more than that. But Metropolis is a fantastic movie, and it's the first one on this list. We'll move on to the next movie, which also came out in 1927, and that's Wings. Now, Wings is the very first movie to win Best Picture at the Academy Awards, and that's part of why this movie is important. I watched this movie for the first time just last year, so if you haven't seen it, don't worry about it, because I've only seen it just recently. But oh my gosh, this movie is fantastic. Wings is also a silent film, and it's about pilots in World War I. How they lived their lives. And there's a very famous shot from this movie. It's very, very, I knew about the shot before watching the movie, but it goes through a dining room, and it just zooms in over all of these tables and tables and tables till it finally gets to the main character, who's holding a champagne glass with his fist, and the champagne is being poured into it. If you saw it, you probably know what I'm talking about. The shot has been parodied time and time again. The shot has been paid homage to. There's a whole lot going on in this movie visually. The cinematography is really good. Once again, it is a silent film, so you have to read the title cards, but that's not a problem. I think that this movie is so important. Not only was it the first Best Picture winner, it's just a good story. And they're telling a good story in a visually interesting way, and I love it. I remember when we watched this movie, me and my wife sat down and we watched it, and my wife commented, she said, "Oh, well, why did they choose to make this movie about World War I? Why didn't they make it about World War II?" I sat there and I looked at her and I said, well, this came out in 1927. World War II hasn't happened yet when this movie came out. So I thought that was kind of funny. It's a fun story that I want to share with you. But that's it for Wings. Wings is number 2. Let's move on to number 3. This movie is important in a different sense. It came out in 1933, and that is King Kong, the original King Kong. And obviously King Kong is a property that has endured for a long, long time. There was another King Kong movie in the 70s, I believe. There was King Kong in 2005, the Peter Jackson version, which I really enjoy. Some people think it's too long or not very good. I think that movie's great. And then there was Kong Skull Island, came out just a few years ago, and we're going to get Godzilla versus King Kong. I thought it was supposed to be this year, but maybe with the coronavirus, it's going to be pushed back. Who knows? But King Kong as a property has existed for a really long time. 1933 was the first movie. And the visual effects, they use stop motion animation effects in order to create King Kong swatting at the airplanes. So when you watch it now, of course, it looks fake and old because it is fake and old. Movies are fake. That's what they are. So if you're watching a movie, if it's up to the standard of the time that the movie was made, I think it's fine. I don't think there's anything to complain about. If you watch a movie and the visual effects are not up to snuff for the time of when it came out, then I think it's okay to complain. A good example of this is in 1979, I believe, was when Star Trek The Motion Picture came out. And that was 2 years after the original Star Wars, and those visual effects are significantly worse than the original Star Wars in 1977. So for King Kong to look the way it did in 1933, I think that was pretty special, pretty spectacular for the people back in the day who watched that movie. And of course, King Kong, it's a classic story of like going to Skull Island, seeing the dinosaurs, King Kong kind of falling in love with the pretty girl and like falling from the Empire State Building. Like this is golden Hollywood type stuff, not golden age Hollywood I was about to say, but this is just really important cinema. So King Kong from 1933 is my third pick. Number 4, this movie is so good. Oh my goodness. It came out in 1936, and that is Modern Times. This is a Charlie Chaplin movie, also black and white, also silent film. We're almost out of the silent film era of this list here. This is the last silent film, so just bear with me while I talk about Modern Times. Modern Times is similar to Metropolis in the sense it's about like a working man. So Charlie Chaplin plays this working man, and I'm sure you've seen clips of Charlie Chaplin on rollerblades, and he's going back and forth, and he almost gets to the edge and almost falls over like time and time again, and it's terrifying to watch him do that. Like the way this movie looks and the way that they achieved visual effects through camera trickery is actually brilliant, and I wish that movies did this kind of stuff more and more, as opposed to just going with digital effects. This movie's effects were all practical in the way the sets were built and the way the camera, like forced perspective, was conceived. And it's just fascinating to see that way back in 1936 that they knew how to manipulate depth of field. And it just blows my mind because I have that limiting belief in my mind that back in the day, people were stupid and nowadays they're not. But that's not true. This movie came out less than 100 years ago. People were still smart, even though their cameras were in black and white, even though they couldn't record audio and it had to be done separately. This is something that I need to get over in my own mind, and I'm sure there are a lot of people out there who feel that way too, and part of why a lot of people won't watch black and white movies because they just feel, oh no, those movies, like they can't be good. They're too old. How can they possibly? But Modern Times is an excellent example of how these movies can be fantastic and better than a lot of movies that are made today. So Modern Times is a big recommendation for me. I love that movie. We're moving on to the next one. Number 5 is Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Came out in 1937. Obviously, this is Walt Disney's magnum opus. It is a game changer for animation. It is the first feature-length animated film. It's fully in color. It's real long because before this, it was just little Mickey Mouse short cartoons and other cartoons as well that would play before movies. So you'd have the little cartoon before a movie, and then you would watch the movie, and then you would watch trailers for the next movie. And that's why they're called trailers, actually, because they came after the original movie. They trailed after. So there's a little bit of film history for you. That's why it's called a trailer. But Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was revolutionary. And I have this movie on Blu-ray, and oh my goodness, this movie is beautiful. Like, Walt Disney's heart and soul was poured into this movie. And I have Walt Disney's biography here at home that I've read, and the stuff that he went through, the work that went into creating this film, the money that went into it, it's just phenomenal. I absolutely love this movie. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. It is so good. You should check it out. Even though it's animated, even though it came out in the 1930s, you should check it out. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was number 5. We'll move on to number 6. Number 6 is another one from the 1930s. It came out in 1939. Another movie I really love. If you would have listened to episode 50, you would have heard me talking about this movie. And of course, it's The Wizard of Oz. Just to kind of recap, this movie has stood the test of time more than any other film. It is so ingrained into our culture. Everything from I'll Get You, My Pretty, I Don't Think We're in Kansas Anymore, If I Only Had a Brain, Follow the Yellow Brick Road, all of these different things. Like, There's No Place Like Home, again and again and again and again. These things pop up in pop culture because this movie has made such a mark on the film industry, that it is important, and if you have not seen The Wizard of Oz, you should watch it. There's nothing else for me to say about that. Just watch The Wizard of Oz. Let's move on to number 7. I don't have a lot to say about Wizard of Oz that I haven't said already, and I don't feel like repeating myself. So we'll move on to number 7. Number 7 is Fantasia from 1940. This is another Walt Disney passion project. Now, basically what Fantasia is, if you have not seen it, is it's a series of little shorts that are kind of strung together into one feature. So basically what they did is they took a piece of famous classical music and gave it to the artists at Disney, and they said, like, listen to this and come up with a story for it. So normally, when you make a story, you come up with it, and then you give that story to the composer and say, like, watch this and come up with a score for it. But this is the exact opposite. They took existing music and created stories for it, and it's beautiful. You have the dancing mushrooms, you have the dancing hippos, you've got Chernabog, the demon. This is also where Sorcerer Mickey comes from, the Sorcerer's Apprentice. This movie is just a giant tone poem, and it's beautiful, and it's breathtaking. I love watching Fantasia, so that's why I feel it needs to be on this list as well. So Fantasia from 1940 is my next recommendation. We're only on number 8, and holy, I've been talking for a long time here. This is going to be a long episode, and these next few are all probably going to be long episodes. So just bear with me while I talk about these movies, and hopefully you've seen most of them, and if not, check them out. Like, let's get to watching more movies here, guys. Number 8 is The Great Dictator, and this came out in 1940. Now, this is another Charlie Chaplin film. However, this was Charlie Chaplin's first voice performance. Like, it's a talkie, as they called them back in the day. This is his first time doing this. Now, I have talked about this movie on the podcast before when we talked about best monologues. So if you've listened to that episode, you kind of know how I feel about this movie. I like it a lot. And especially because it was speaking out against the Nazi regime as the Nazi regime was happening. So back in 1940, Charlie Chaplin decided that he needed to take a big political stand against Adolf Hitler and made this movie. And this movie is fantastic. He gives a wonderful monologue at the end about the hope of mankind. It's fantastic. The Great Dictator from 1940. Please go check it out. Number 9 on the list is Citizen Kane, and this came out in 1941. Citizen Kane is a movie that is often regarded as the greatest film of all time. I don't know if I would say that, but if I had to be impartial and judge greatest movies of all time, Citizen Kane would probably be in the top 5 at least, maybe top 10, probably top 5 if I'm being honest with myself. It's really, really good. It's all about the life of Charles Foster Kane, and he's kind of the most interesting person who ever lived, and it's through the eyes of a reporter who is examining his life after his death and trying to figure out just who was this guy, what were his desires, what were his goals, what were his ambitions, and what did his final utterance before he died mean. And that's what Citizen Kane is all about, and it's such a fantastic movie. Citizen Kane came out in 1941, and the next movie, number 10, came out in 1942, and that's Casablanca. Obviously, this movie needs to be on the list. I don't even think I need to say why. It's just fantastic. The writing, to the dialogue, to the performance of Humphrey Bogart. Oh my goodness, Humphrey Bogart is so good in this movie. Actually, I think he's really good in every movie, but especially in Casablanca. This is a very special movie. Also has stood the test of time. It has one of the most famous final shots of a movie of all time. So you should sit down and you should watch Casablanca if you have the ability to. Lots of these movies, actually, I've watched from getting them from the library. Now, maybe the library is open where you're living, but for me, it's definitely not. Not allowed to get movies or books from the library. If you currently have anything from the library, you can't return it right now. So there's that holding you back. There are other ways to watch movies, so hopefully you have an opportunity to check some of these movies out. Casablanca was 1942, and we're moving into 1944 with number 11, and that is Double Indemnity. Now, this is the first but not the last time that director Billy Wilder appears on this list. Billy Wilder is one of my favorite directors of all time. I think he's just magnificent. And Double Indemnity is the story. It's a film noir about this man who falls in love with this married woman, and they arrange to murder her husband in order to get the insurance money, and then they run away with the money. And it's about how they're trying to get away with this crime. And it's so good. Really engaging, really interesting. The characters are really three-dimensional and really well fleshed out. It's a fantastic movie. The cinematography for this movie is actually really on point. So check out Double Indemnity, directed by Billy Wilder. Came out in 1944. The next movie, number 12, is kind of a no-brainer, needs to be included on a list like this, and that's It's a Wonderful Life from 1946. A lot of people really like to watch this movie around Christmas time, myself included. I think this movie is wonderful. Not the first... No, it's the first time that Jimmy Stewart appears on this list, but definitely not the last time. There's a lot of movies with him in it that are just so good. Jimmy Stewart is wonderful. I love him, and you should too. So, It's a Wonderful Life is the story about a man who wishes he had never been born. He just has a lot of things going on in his life and wishes that he just didn't exist at all, and gets to see what the world would look like if he didn't live in it. And it opens his eyes to like the impact that he's made on the world, and kind of reminds us that we're all important in some way, even if that way is not apparent to us. So It's a Wonderful Life is just, I keep saying that, this movie's fantastic, this movie's fantastic. And that's because all of them are. They're so good. So good. But I'm going to move on to number 13. Once again, this movie is on my list of favorite movies ever. So Sunset Boulevard from 1950. It's another film noir from director Billy Wilder about an aging has-been actress who takes advantage of a young up-and-coming Hollywood writer to try and restart her career, but at the same time, he's using her wealth to try and get his career up and running as well. So it's kind of like a game of cat and mouse, like they're using each other, and they're trying to position themselves in the best that they can be. It's really good. It's also an excellent look into the mind of how an actor thinks and how they approach their craft. Now, obviously, not every actor behaves and performs the way that this actor does in Sunset Boulevard, but it's just an interesting way to look at how acting works and getting into character and things like that. So Sunset Boulevard is a movie I highly recommend. It's like on this first set of 25 movies, it's probably my favorite one out of all of them. Actually, no, it definitely is. Out of this first 25 movies, Sunset Boulevard is my favorite one. But we'll move on to number 14 from 1952, and that is Singin' in the Rain. This is a musical. It has also kind of imprinted itself on Hollywood pop culture. There's a lot of things from Singing in the Rain that come up again and again and again in modern cinema, or even not as modern cinema. But this movie has been around for a long time, and it's very famous, it's very well known. The dance numbers, the songs that they sing, it's all really good. So Singin' in the Rain from 1952, this is another one that I haven't seen in a while, and I should rewatch it. Because I have so much time at home now, maybe I'm going to sit down and listen to I'm going to watch Singin' in the Rain. Because I'm going to go on a side tangent here for a second. I just accidentally said, listen to a movie. I don't listen to movies. I watch movies. If a movie is playing, I am watching that movie. And you should be too. If you have your phone on you and you look at your phone while that movie is playing, you are not watching that movie. You're not giving that movie its attention that it deserves. All of the people that worked on that movie, they deserve the attention for at least a little bit. If you can't just sit and watch a movie for 2 or 3 hours, then it is my opinion that, hey, don't watch that movie unless you can give your full attention to it. Especially when it comes to some of these movies that are important films. Movies that have an impact on the film industry, that have impacted people's lives, life-changing roles that have come across. Like, this is important. At least to me it is. So when I watch a movie, my phone goes away. I am watching the movie. Okay, end of rant. If that's just how I feel about watching movies, it is something that means a lot to me. So I always like to be focused. I don't like to talk during movies. I just like to be immersed in the story that's being told to me. I'm going to move on to number 15, though, and number 15 came out in 1954. This is the first foreign film to make the list, and oh, actually, no, it's not the first foreign film, because I said Metropolis was a German movie. So it's the second foreign film to make the list. In 1954, we got Godzilla. Now, the original Godzilla, it's a Japanese film, a guy in a big rubber suit knocking over styrofoam buildings, and this also has sparked franchises going back for a long time. Lots of Godzilla movies. We got Godzilla versus Mothra, I think is one of my favorite ones. You've got like Mecha Godzilla. You have the really bad Matthew Broderick one from the 1990s. The Godzilla from 2014, which was directed by Gareth Edwards. I really like that one. I think it's super good. And then last year we got Godzilla King of the Monsters, which I thought was not very good. But Godzilla is this movie icon that has just stood the test of time. He's still around. We're supposed to be getting Godzilla vs. King Kong later this year. Don't know if that's going to happen. And it's just, Godzilla is here to stay. And Godzilla is pretty cool. He has nuclear breath. He's got a big tail. He's really tall. And that's all there is. It's Godzilla. So if you're a fan of monster movies, you should check out that original Godzilla movie. Let's move on, though, to number 16. Also came out in 1954. This is the first movie by director Alfred Hitchcock to make the list. Also not the last time that he appears, and that is Rear Window. Now, actually, me and my wife and my sister who live with us plan on watching Rear Window this very evening on the day of this recording. I'm very excited to sit down and watch it because it's been a while, and this movie is really good. Now, Alfred Hitchcock is often regarded as the master of suspense, and this movie is so suspenseful. Like, it's all about this guy in a wheelchair who's stuck in his house, kind of like we are right now, stuck in his house, so he's just looking through his window and spying on his neighbors, and he thinks that one of his neighbors maybe killed his wife, and it's about like him figuring out, like, did this happen, did this not, like, what is going on? And I think that it's just so, like, edge of your seat, this movie. Like, you have no idea what's gonna happen, and I love it for that. So Rear Window from 1954. I have one more movie from 1954 to talk about, and it's another Japanese movie, and that's Seven Samurai. Now, this movie is directed by a man named Akira Kurosawa. Now, this is the only movie of his that I have seen. Apparently, all of his movies are really fantastic. I need to stop being so lazy and get copies of his other movies so that I can watch them. But Seven Samurai is the only one that I've seen, and it is really, really good. If you're familiar with The Magnificent Seven, like that Western where a bunch of cowboys save a town, The Magnificent Seven is the American version of Seven Samurai. So basically there's this town that's being overrun by bandits, and they hire these seven samurai to protect them. And that's basically what this movie is about. And then we get like deep dives into the psychoses of these different characters and what they think and how they react to things, and the cinematography. Oh my goodness, the way this movie looks and the way the frames are all set up is just magnificent. So Seven Samurai is another one of these movies that, like, if you consider yourself a movie buff in any way, check this movie out. It is pretty long from what I remember. It's over 2.5 hours for sure. Might be close to the 3-hour mark, but if you have the time, check out Seven Samurai. We'll move on to number 18, which is 12 Angry Men. Now, this movie came out in 1957, and this movie is interesting in the sense that it takes place in one room. The whole movie is just in one room, and basically the 12 Angry Men are 12 jurors in a jury, and they're all named like juror 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. They don't have actual names, so you don't know the names of these people. And it's all about them talking about this court case and trying to decide whether this kid is guilty or not guilty. And they talk about the difference between not guilty and innocent, and is there reasonable doubt, and can they question some of the things that have been brought up in the court trial. And it's just fascinating. I loved this movie. It's another one that I watched just for the first time last year. After I watched it, I just kept thinking about it and thinking about it and thinking about it, because this movie like struck me. It is fantastic. Not Seven Samurai, 12 Angry Men from 1957. Please check it out. It's really unique and really good. We're already on to number 19 here. We're getting close to the end of this list. 19 is the Best Picture winner from 1957, and that is Bridge on the River Kwai. Now, if you have not seen Bridge on the River Kwai, it's a war movie. And I don't want to say any more than that, because it's one of those movies you just got to experience. You know, it's got Alec Guinness in it, which is great. He's a very talented actor. He's the original Obi-Wan Kenobi, if you're not familiar with who Alec Guinness is. And if I were to make a list of best war movies, Bridge on the River Kwai is probably definitely on this list. I actually have it from the library right now, so I'm going to rewatch it pretty soon. I wanted to be able to rewatch it before making this list and talking about the movie on the podcast, because it has been a while since I've seen it. If I remember it correctly, and I remember movies pretty well, it's an excellent choice. So, Bridge on the River Kwai from 1957. We're at number 20, and that's gonna be Ben-Hur from 1959, starring Charlton Heston. Now, Ben-Hur is another one of those like epic movies. It's super long. I do believe it's over 3 hours, and I love every minute of Ben-Hur. It's a revenge story. It's similar to the Odyssey in that sense, that he was betrayed and sold into slavery, and he has to like work his way back up in society. I think the movie Gladiator takes a lot of influence from Ben-Hur in that sense, that he was betrayed and sold into slavery, and then like tries to get revenge on those who betrayed him. And oh my goodness, the chariot race scene is so intense and crazy, and like the way that they built the set and like the making of this movie is magnificent. The way this movie looks, the way this movie was shot, the way the performances just all come together. Everything about Ben-Hur works. This is a movie that also has made a huge impact on the film industry. It was a huge hit when it came out. There was a remake of it a couple of years ago, I think in 2017 or 18. I never saw it though, because watching the trailers, it just didn't look like it even held a candle to Ben-Hur. Now, this is one of those movies that just has such a scale to it. Like, it feels big. It feels expansive. This movie has everything that it needs to really breathe and grow and let you get to know the characters and really bond with Ben-Hur. And then you feel for him on such a level that when you get to the end of the movie, you feel like you've been on a journey. You went on this journey with Ben-Hur, and it's absolutely fantastic. Once again, I'm using that word fantastic. I should think of a different word, but I'm not going to. We'll move on to number 21, another one that is on my top 10 favorite movies of all time, and that is Some Like It Hot from 1959, a wonderful, charming comedy about two musicians who are on the run during Prohibition era. And this is another movie that is directed by Billy Wilder. So we've got 3 Billy Wilder movies on the list already. I said Double Indemnity, Sunset Boulevard, and now Some Like It Hot. We're actually going to have 2 Billy Wilder movies in a row here, because number 21 is Some Like It Hot, which I highly recommend. Go check it out. But then number 2 from 1960 is The Apartment. Now, this movie won Best Picture the year that it came out, and I think I've talked about it on the podcast before, not as much as Some Like It Hot, so I'll give a quick rundown for this movie right now. The Apartment is a movie about a man who's played by Jack Lemmon, and in order for him to like rise the ranks in his company, he's allowing his employers to use his apartment to bring their mistresses to. And that's the premise of this movie. So it's really fun, but also really interesting and really dramatic. Shirley MacLaine is also in this movie. I love her. She's just a sweetheart in this movie. If you're not familiar with who Shirley MacLaine is, she's in the movie Steel Magnolias, which came out in the 90s, and she plays Weezer, just like this grizzled old lady. But in The Apartment, she's really charming and like, what a sweetheart. The Apartment from 1960. Please check it out. We're at number 23 already. I kind of flew past Some Like It Hot, but I've talked about it on the podcast before. I don't want to keep beating the same drum again and again. Let's talk about movies that I haven't had a chance to talk about. So number 23 is also from 1960, and that is Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. Now, this is my favorite horror film of all time. It's really fascinating in the way that you think the story is about one character and then just completely shifts. And now the movie is about something else entirely. And oh my goodness, I love this movie so much. It's one of those ones that you think about for a long time after you first see it. You just think about like, oh man, like the stuff that happens in this movie, it's absolutely nuts. So number 3 is Psycho from 1960. It's one of Alfred Hitchcock's best. If I had to pick a favorite Alfred Hitchcock, I'm probably going to go with Rear Window, but Psycho is probably number 2. I like this movie a lot. And Alfred Hitchcock, just as a director in general, is really great. If you haven't seen any of his movies, you should check them out. Like at movie stores, there's always like bundles of Alfred Hitchcock movies that you can buy, and just watch them, because the way that he constructs a story and the way he uses a camera, Vertigo is a great example of using the camera to create like new and interesting techniques in order to help tell the story that you're telling. Vertigo is not on this list of 100 movies actually, but it almost was. Like, it's an important movie too. But I'm talking about Psycho right now. So Psycho is just a crazy movie. I have nothing but positive things to say about it. It's a work of art. It's a masterpiece. That's what I would say what Psycho is. Psycho is a masterpiece. As much as I think that Rear Window is a better movie and it's suspenseful and it's more engaging, I wouldn't ascribe the word masterpiece to Rear Window, but I would to Psycho in just what it did to audiences at the time that it came out and how it impacted the film industry. So Psycho from 1960 is a very important film, even from the way that music is used in this movie was not done before. Literally a groundbreaking film from a music perspective, from a visual perspective, from a storytelling perspective. Like, this movie set the pathway for a lot of modern horror films that we would not have today if it weren't for Psycho in 1960. I only have 2 movies left to talk about today, and that's going to be it for this week. Number 24 is from 1961, and that is Breakfast at Tiffany's, starring the lovely Audrey Hepburn, who is one of my favorite actresses of all time. I think she's absolutely wonderful. She's beautiful, she's talented, she can sing, she can just do everything. Breakfast at Tiffany's is not a musical, though. It does have one musical performance where Audrey Hepburn sings the song Moon River. That song did win Best Original Song at the Academy Awards. This movie did not win Best Picture, though, which is a real shame. And I don't even know how to describe this movie. Not in a way that would kind of give things away. This is another one of those movies that I just want people to sit down and experience. Just watch Breakfast at Tiffany's and experience it. It's one of those movies that has a lot of mystery to it and kind of keeps you guessing. I would not describe this movie as film noir, but it's pretty close. It's kind of on that level, but not quite. Like, nobody's getting murdered, but there's a whole lot of mystery, and I would almost describe Holly Golightly as a femme fatale. If I'm way off base on that, please reach out to me and let me know, and we can have a discussion about it. But I think there are some good arguments for Holly Golightly being a femme fatale. But that's it for Breakfast at Tiffany's. I've got one more movie left to talk about today, and number 25 is Dr. No. It came out in 1962, and if you are not familiar, Dr. No was the very first James Bond movie, and it starred Sean Connery as James Bond, and it set the pathway for one of the biggest movie franchises of all time, Bond number 25, No Time to Die, was supposed to come out right away. Obviously, because of coronavirus, it has been pushed back. It's now being released in November. But what Sean Connery did with the role and the introduction of just what a James Bond movie is and setting the groundwork for everything that we know that is now so iconic, from the music to some of the camera shots to the names Bond, James Bond. Like, there is so much to this movie that has now become a cultural icon. And maybe James Bond movies don't work in the same way that they used to in the 1960s and 70s and 80s. But even looking at a movie like Casino Royale, which used all of these James Bond tropes, but used them in a new and modern way, still allowed it to honor what came before and make way for something new. So I think a movie like Dr. No is really important to film history, and it shows just how powerful, like, making a few specific choices can have ramifications in the future and carry on not only to other movies within its own franchise, but to with other movies just in the film industry as a whole. So there are the first 25 movies of my 100 movie must-watch movie buff list. Normally, when I make a movie list, I do a quick rundown of all of the movies that I listed off, just quickly run them down. Because there's 25 movies here, I'm not going to do that. One thing that I'm planning to do, though, is once I get to movie 100 and I have the entire list like out in podcast episodes, I plan on creating like a Google Doc or something like that, like an official checklist of all of these movies where you can go and you can check out that list and you can print it off at home if you want and like keep track of how many you've seen or any that you plan on watching, things like that. So that's something that's going to be coming out once I have the entire list released to you guys. But before I go, I'll close up the show here. So I would like to know, which of these 25 movies have you seen? Which of them are you interested in watching? Please feel free to let me know. You can reach out to me on social media. You can find me on Twitter at PottleNathan, and you can find the show on Instagram at Movies Are Awesome Podcast. Also, if you like the show, please feel free to subscribe to it or let a friend know. You can find the show on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, and a whole bunch of other places. Thank you for listening to today's episode. It is a weird time for everyone right now, and I hope that you guys are staying inside. I hope that you're staying safe, and if you have nothing else to do, go watch more movies.